So good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn. I'm Tony Ross of Provalis Research. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to remind everybody just to keep their cameras off if you can. The people who have them on now, or me, my camera will be going off shortly, and Lydia and David will be doing the presentation. It's just because cameras on can be distracting for people. If there are people in the audience who would like to present your work through our Lunch and Learn series and have an instructive way of how to use our software, please contact us through the Contact Us section of our website. We'd love to hear from you. And, we get anywhere from 50 to 100 people watching these, and many more watching them on video that when we record them and post them on our website. So it's a good way to reach out to your colleagues and to get to people to see what you're doing. I'll also call your attention to our next Lunch and Learn. It will be held next Tuesday, September 22nd at the usual time, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. That's New York time. The title is Discovering Latent Political Discourses. Dr. Peter Jacques shows theoretical and methodological processes to identify and describe discourses using dictionary-based content analysis. Dr. Jacques is a professor at the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs, University of Central Florida. He has extensive experience with content analysis and WordStat. So to today's event, the title of today's presentation is Use Stata and WordStat to Analyze Twitter Data to Assess Economic Sentiment. Our presenters today will be David White and Lydia Pik Yi Cheung. Lydia is a senior lecturer and an academic researcher in the School of Economics at the Auckland University of Technology, with a focus in interindustrial organization, competitive economics, and applied microeconomics. She graduated summa cum laude from Boston University and obtained her Ph.D. in economics from the University of Minnesota. Her published paper on the competition of print newspaper advertising in New Zealand won the New Zealand Business Research Translation Award in May 2021. Outside academia, Lydia has worked at Amazon.com in Seattle and as a research scientist under the chief economist. So she knows firsthand that economic ideas and econometric tools can be powerful in a high-stakes business environment. Lydia is a passionate Stata user, consultant, and instructor. David White is a director with Survey Design and Analysis, the distributor of WordStat, QDA Miner, Stata, and several other data analytics packages in Australia, Indonesia, and New Zealand. In addition to his role in SDAS, David is an independent consultant providing training and advisory services in data analytics, IT risk management, IT insurance. David is passionate about data and the insights that data can provide. At the end of the presentation, if you wish to ask questions, please send them to us through the chat feature at the right corner of your screen, the right side of your screen. We'll take as many as time allows. And now I'll turn the presentation over to David and Lydia.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Tony. And welcome, everyone. This is a lunch and learn for me. I'm based here in Australia, so it's actually just after 7 a.m. So I'm not intending to eat my lunch. Lydia is based in New Zealand, so it's 9 a.m.
Just had my breakfast.
You've had your breakfast? Very good, Lydia. So hopefully the timing of this presentation is okay for everyone. And thank you for being able to accommodate it a little bit later in the day and not actually being at your lunchtime today. So what Lydia and I are going to take you through is a piece of work that Lydia and I started work on back in the beginning of 2020. I think it was about March 2020, we first started to come up with this concept of should we have a look at some Twitter data, or should we have a look at some social media data using WordStat? And we started to discuss that and started to come up with the idea of let's have a look to see if there's any economic sentiment being displayed within the Twitter data. So what we want to take you through, the process that we went through. I'm not going to actually show you a whole lot of steps that we went through. I'm not going to show you the technical steps that we did, but I will tell you about some of them. We'll take you through the hypothesis, so what we thought we might be able to achieve. We'll take you through the approach that we put together, and then I'll actually step you through Lydia and I will take you through the steps that we went through. We had some interesting observations coming out of it, and we'll talk you through those. But the main outcome was actually some different ideas and some next steps that we could actually take, and maybe some of you wish to take if you wanted to take this piece of research further. So that's our agenda for the meeting, for the lunch and learn today. Lydia, was there anything you thought we needed to touch on?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, good-o. Well, let's move on. Okay, so we put together our hypothesis, and it was that the sentiment analysis of social media posts can be used as a model for assessment of macroeconomic performance. So I'll put that in layman's terms. We wanted to see whether or not the comments that people were making in Twitter or Facebook or other social media could actually be a method of predicting or being able to equate to macroeconomic performance. So whether or not the economy was going good or the economy was going bad. So we wanted to see if positive comments in social media, did that represent something good happening in the economy? And was there a relationship between these two things? So that's what we set out to achieve. And Lydia and I first started work on this back in March 2020. And as you probably all know, the COVID pandemic started around the same time. So
that was actually inspiration for us, because the pandemic was a big shock to both sentiment, of course, and economic performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know much about economic sentiment in other countries, but I do know about New Zealand and Australia. They have both been impacted significantly by the pandemic, significant downturns in economic performance in Australia, and same in New Zealand, based on what I'm hearing and what I've looked at from the information that Lydia's helped me obtain.
Yeah. I mean, our strictest lockdown was pretty strict. Like, my friends from other countries were surprised when I told them there's not even restaurants and takeout food. And can you imagine the absence of, like, your no access to KFC and McDonald's, how that affects sentiment?
Yeah, it does. And what is it? We must be 21 months later from the start of it, and Australia is still mostly in a lockdown. So I'm actually presenting to you from Canberra, and we've been in lockdown for the last 6 weeks, and I've still got 3 weeks in front of me. So that was our hypothesis. Now, we put together a conceptual approach to actually perform this analysis. First, we wanted to collect a body of social media data for a specific period. Then we wanted to perform analysis on that, and we decided that we would use WordStat for that. We started to think about what we might do, and we considered, well, actually WordStat does sentiment analysis. I'd actually learned how to do that from a training that I'd attended with Norman. So we thought, yep, let's use WordStat for that. The next part of our conceptual approach was to then compare the results. So once we had the economic data and the social media data, could we actually see a relationship between those points? And then the final part was assess that and work out whether or not we can actually see trends between the two data sets as well. So fairly simple approach: collect the data, analyze the data, do some comparison, and then create an assessment and deliver some observations. So our first step in this process was to extract the data from Twitter. Now, if you're a WordStat user, you'll most likely know that WordStat has a really cool feature that allows you to extract data from Twitter. You can extract data. WordStat will let you extract data from Twitter, from YouTube. You can set up RSS feeds. You can extract from SurveyMonkey. You can extract from a whole bunch of different tools to pull the data directly into WordStat. And so our initial plan was to use this feature within WordStat to be able to pull the data directly from Twitter and begin to build a data set in WordStat. Now, that was really positive because WordStat already had that there. It was ready to go and it works. I've used it numerous times and it just works. The problem that we came across was that extract is limited to the last 30 days. And it's also limited in the number of tweets that you're allowed to download. So that was going to create a bit of a problem for us. That meant if we were going to do this analysis, we had to be constantly running WordStat to pull this data in. And so we had to plan out many months in advance how we were going to get this data down. So we started to investigate how other people get data out of Twitter. And so what I found was that if you have a developer account, you can actually download a larger amount of tweets. So what we landed on there was to go and set up a developer account. So to set up a developer account, a couple of things that you need. You first have to have a Twitter user ID. Then you need to apply to become a developer. So I had to submit some information up to Twitter with that application. I even had to demonstrate that I was doing this for academic research. So I needed some support from Lydia with a nice letter from Lydia to say, yeah, David's doing this research, not for commercial purposes, but for academic research. And then Twitter eventually decided to allow me to have a Twitter account. They gave me a free developer academic account, and that allowed me access to 5,000 tweets, to download 5,000 tweets per month from their Twitter archive, and 25,000 tweets per month from their last 30 days. So it was more than WordStat was able to give me access to. But the really big thing was I was able to get access to the historical data. So I was actually able to go back many months and have a look and pull the data down from Twitter. Now, yes, it was limited to 5,000 tweets, but I set myself a reminder on the 4th day of each month, which was when my Twitter account reset. I'd go in, download the tweets, and essentially I download 30,000 tweets over every month. Now, the really positive thing about that was I was able to build a much bigger data set. And we ended up with about, I think it was 125,000 tweets that we were able to put into our data set, covering a period of time from August 2019. So we predated the pandemic, and we took that through to about December 2020. So we looked at essentially the first year of the pandemic.
No, actually, all the way to 2021. We have some data from
2021, yes.
January 2021.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
1.5
remember that.
years.
Yes, yes. So it was a good amount of data that we're able to get. Now, a key thing that we did here was that we wanted to be able to analyze the data initially in WordStat, but to get it into WordStat, we had to develop a tool using the, and we ended up developing a tool using Stata. So we use Stata, and one of the features within Stata, which allows you to write Python scripts, I found a gentleman had developed a Python script to extract data from Twitter using the Twitter API, which I now had access to. And from there, I was able to use that Python script. And I thought, okay, this Python script, it's not really what I'm into. I'm not a Python developer. So one of my staff, Laura Whiting, she was actually able to build for me a she built me a Stata Python Twitter download tool. So she created a Stata dialog box where we could enter in the information that we needed, click certain boxes, we'd select the hashtag that we needed, and it would download the data and it would convert it into a Stata data set. Now, one of the really good things about getting it into a Stata data set is that WordStat is able to read Stata data sets. So I was able to pull this data in from Python using the Python script into a nice, clean Stata data set, and then we were able to build it from there. So, okay. So we extracted the data. It took about 6 months to extract the data. So yes, Lydia and I started conceptualizing this back in March, but it actually took until about August 2020 for Twitter to approve the Twitter account, and for them to get the Twitter extract tool set up in Stata so we could extract the data. Now, if any of you are looking to go and get a Twitter academic account set up, please note that it's not a simple, straightforward process. There is quite an application to go through, and it is going to take them about a month or so, maybe even longer, for them to actually approve your application. It's not something straightforward. They happily accept paid applications. So you can actually purchase a developer account and you can start paying for the downloads. There is a cost. If you pay, I think it's $100 US a month, then you are allowed a next level of downloads. If you pay $1,000 US a month, you can have the next level up. And if you pay a bigger fee again, you actually can get unlimited access to the downloads. But it is a subscription service, so if you're prepared to pay $1,000 a month, then maybe you can get a larger data set. The next thing that we needed to consider as we started to download our tweets was, were there any particular hashtags that we should consider? And looking at the New Zealand Twitter users, so we did some initial analysis on the users of Twitter in New Zealand, and I started to focus on several different hashtags. So we looked at the hashtag COVIDNZ, COVID-19 NZ, NZ economy, NZ politics, and NZ business. And we were able to see that there was a reasonable amount of tweets about this. And we focused on these because we were looking at economic factors. I wasn't interested in tweets about Love Island or any TV programs or any rubbish that may be going on. So I'm quite sure there are tweets out there about that.
it's worth mentioning why we need to think about the hashtags. It's because like some of our audience may not have worked with Twitter data. In fact, I didn't know before this project that we do together, the Twitter data is not tagged by country. That's the problem. I can't just say, I want to download everything New Zealand on Twitter. There is no such thing.
Yeah, there's not. So you've got to go by these hashtags.
Users, yeah,
yes.
or hashtags.
Yeah. Now, there is a possibility that you can say, I want people who are in a particular geographic area based on their geolocation. But the problem with that is a lot of people have that feature turned off in Twitter, and people can also mask that. So if they're going through a VPN, you may be in New Zealand, but you may represent that you're actually in the UK or somewhere else. So we decided to follow these hashtags. We could have looked for certain people as well. So we could have done searches on @real Donald Trump or @Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. We could have looked for particular individuals, but that would have put too much focus on what an individual was saying. So instead, we decided to focus on a range of interesting different hashtags. It took a little while to actually work out what these hashtags would be. So that was another one of the reasons why we didn't start pulling the data until August, because we wanted to get good hashtags. Once we got the data into Stata, we then decided to merge the files in Stata. There are some features within Stata that allowed us to merge the files very quickly and very easily. And then we found that there was some duplication in the tweets. Now, one of the good things about Twitter, every single tweet has a unique Twitter reference number. Now, that means these numbers are actually fairly big, because the amount of tweets that are put out every single day means that there are a lot of tweets, there's a lot of data. And so we were able to remove these duplicate tweets, and that allowed us to remove, I think it was about 23 or 24,000 tweets from our data set. The next thing that we did from within Stata was to actually drop superfluous fields. So Twitter also, when you download the data from Twitter, you just get all of the fields. You can't say, actually, I only want these particular fields. You just get the whole lot. And so there's a couple of interesting things in the Twitter fields, and some of them may be of more interest to you. So there's things like number of users, number of followers, whether or not the tweet is a retweet, whether it's how many times it's been liked. Another funky thing within the data is that there's the original 140 characters, and then there is the 280 characters. So in September 2017, Twitter expanded the size of Twitter from 140 characters to 280 characters. Now, this was a really big move from Twitter, and you can read about it on the Twitter Wikipedia page. But that means that there's some data in two different fields, and we had to work out how to manage that component as well. Then once we got the data in, we took it from Stata, we took it straight into WordStat, and we did some initial analysis to see what people were actually talking about. This slide here, no surprise, when we did some frequency analysis, COVID was really big. So COVID, a lot of tweets about COVID, not a lot about directly mentioning the word economy. A reasonable amount of discussing employment, some more on foreign, mentioning media a lot, and mentioning New Zealand a lot, and mentioning politics quite a bit as well. Now, something interesting that happened during the period that we looked at, New Zealand had a general election. when that was September 2019, was it, Lydia? So we've actually captured, there was a lot of discussion in the very early stage about New Zealand politics. So we've covered a whole range of periods here. We've covered, there was an election, the COVID outbreak, and a significant downturn in the economy because of COVID. But these were some of the key words that we actually saw in there. So the next thing that we wanted to do in the data was we actually wanted to clean it, get the data properly clean. Then we did the exploratory analysis that can be done in WordStat. So we did some basic word frequency work, which you've just seen some examples of. We looked at phrases, we looked at co-occurrences, and we were trying to work out, okay, is there anything particular in there that is standout analysis for us? And that initial work actually led us going to looking at those particular hashtags. So the exploratory analysis was actually two phases, the initial start, and then once we'd built the data set, having a further look at word frequency, word phrases, and co-occurrences of data. Then one of the exercises that we tried was doing some categorization. So we tried creating some categories. Now, the reason I did this was that Lydia and I had discussed a set of statistics that were going to be available that would demonstrate whether or not we could link the Twitter data to economic performance. So we had a look at some different stats that were available from New Zealand stats, or NZ stats as it calls itself.
Stats New Zealand.
Stats New Zealand. So they publish data on housing. They publish data on credit card use or electronic transactions. What were some of the other things that we considered early?
GDP.
GDP and labour.
Unemployment.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there were a bunch
job postings.
Yeah. So there were a bunch of different things they were posting, but what we wanted to be able to do was there a particular set of data that we could look at that would be timely, being published timely, along with the social media data?
Yeah.
And what we ended up landing on was electronic card transactions. So we were able to extract that. But before we could get there, we had to see whether or not we could actually break the Twitter data into these different categories, because the good thing about the credit card or the electronic transactions is that it's broken down by a series of retail
categories.
industries. Yeah. So with that data in those different categories, we wanted to see if we could actually also categorize the data within WordStat. So we used the WordStat categorization features for that. The next thing we decided to do was to actually use the WordStat sentiment analysis. Now, when Norman showed me how to use the WordStat sentiment dictionary, he also gave a very good warning. You can use the WordStat sentiment dictionary, but don't use it straight out of the box, because it is just straight out of the box. It's what Prevalis Research have built for their sentiment dictionary. You need to tailor your sentiment dictionary for your particular topic. Now, I decided not to follow Norman's advice, and we just used the sentiment dictionary straight out of the box. But it seems to have worked. For the basic analysis that we were doing, it was actually able to help us. It was able to help us build that sentiment analysis. The next thing we did was using the dates that we brought across from Twitter. There's a feature within WordStat that allows you to interpret the dates as decades, months, or decades, years, months, individual days, days of the week. So what we did, we used that feature within within WordStat to create separate monthly buckets. And that was important because that allowed us to then go back and compare that against the economic data, which we also had on a month-by-month breakdown. And this is what we actually found when we did the sentiment analysis. So what we looked for was a positive sentiment. And what we found was a quite obvious downward trend. So a few little bumps every now and then, but actually fairly significant downward trend. Now, this graph here, this was created by Lydia in Stata. So we'd actually pulled the data back out of WordStat and we put it into Stata. Is there anything you wanted to add about this one, Lydia? This particular graph?
So when COVID first arrived in New Zealand, that was early 2000. So that was late February or early March. So that dip exactly right in the middle. That is the arrival of COVID.
Yeah. So that's
so at least these events. I mean, this is our first time doing it, right? I don't think anybody else. So other researchers have analyzed Twitter data, but this is our first time doing it using the New Zealand hashtags. I mean, we have no idea what to expect. This is our first time doing sentiment analysis. And we are complete outsiders. We just trust their dictionary. So we have no idea what's going to come out. But big events like this sort of match our hunches. So we sort of feel that this is not complete rubbish.
Yeah. So it actually shows that there's a bit of an alignment. So
yeah. It's worth mentioning the second drop is when New Zealand has its second lockdown. So that was August 2020. That was our second lockdown.
So that was this dip here.
At the bottom, exactly the bottom. Yeah.
So it's noted here. This is when New Zealand was actually doing really good, wasn't it?
So this we were living normal lives.
Yeah. Now, since you've been back in lockdown again, I'd hate to see what it's like now.
The second trough is lower than the first one.
Yes.
And personally, I feel that this is our fourth lockdown. My sentiment's definitely lower than last time.
So then the next thing that we did was we actually tried to compare this information that we got from Twitter using WordStat. We then wanted to compare that to the economic analysis. So what we did here was we considered several different economic indicators. So we looked at what Stats New Zealand had.
Not only Stats New Zealand. I mean, David, earlier on, we even considered variables like exchange rates. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Fluctuates a lot on a daily basis. And we had some hunches on what variables might be more directly correlated with sentiment. Like some variables are noisier, some variables are just available in lower frequency. So for example, we consider GDP, but unfortunately in New Zealand, the GDP estimate only comes out once every quarter. And that would mean that we basically would only have 6 quarters or so.
Yeah. So part of our analysis was to work out what could we look at that would come out timely. And so this is why we fell upon the credit card transactions or the electronic card transaction.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it was broken down by category. So a whole range of different categories. The other thing that we discovered was that there is a Roy Morgan issue a consumer confidence rating every month as well. And we were able to go back and we were able to get that sentiment, and it covers a similar or the same set of categories as the electronic card transactions. So we're actually able to do a comparison there. So our next step was, now that we'd done the sentiment analysis within WordStat, we pulled the data back out into Stata, and we were able to start to compare do a month by month comparison
Yeah, we do a correlation.
And I think so when we compared the results, we did two types of comparisons. We first correlated the Twitter data with the electronic card transactions, and we also correlated the Twitter data with the Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index. And both sets of data are actually publicly available. So there's if you wanted to go and actually test this out again, you can actually download this data yourselves.
And I'm sure similar data is available in other countries too.
Yes, I'm quite sure Roy Morgan are probably doing the exact same thing for Australia. So then this is the results that we actually saw. So Lydia, do you want to talk us through this one, because you understand this one more than I do?
Yeah, no problem. So we computed these correlations in Stata just because I am a Stata user, it's easier for me. But if you don't have Stata, I'm sure any other statistical software, even Excel, would compute correlations for you. So the idea is that consumer confidence ratings, that is available in many countries, of course, but these ratings are costly to compute. So at least this rating in New Zealand, they survey, I think, 1,000 consumers every month in order to get the confidence rating. We want to see if the sentiment analysis we do on Twitter, if somebody wants to do it, you can automate it and do it automatically every month at a much less costly way. We want to see how these two compare as a predictor for expenditure. So that is why we have two columns here. So the first column, the first column here is correlation between sentiment, so what we have on Twitter, and the electronic cards transactions. And you can see here the data in New Zealand breaks down the card transactions into 12 categories. The second column here are also correlations. We are correlating the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Rating with the electronic card transactions. May as well go through the second column first. It's because this, if we didn't do our project, this is what we will have in the data. So we want you, it's a little bit like a horse race between what we have in Twitter versus the consumer confidence rating. So what we see is that some categories are just more correlated with consumer confidence than others. So what are some big numbers that jump out? The second number, accommodation. Correlation is 0.96, very strong. What else? The category number 3, food and beverages, beverage services. Oh, so I'm guessing this is only restaurants. This does not include food and beverages that you buy from supermarket. So this is 0.83. What else? The last one is also very positive, 0.91. And the last category, category 12, is travel agency and tour. So that has to do with tourism. It's also worth mentioning there is a very negative correlation. It is the second to last one. It is negative 0.5, and that is on supermarkets. So some are more strongly correlated than others. We want to see, so comparing, so we now want to compare our Twitter results with these. This is, again, our first time doing it. We have no idea how anything will perform. We expected to get like nothing, like zero correlation, or like all over the place. I think we are, given that is our expectation, we didn't expect anything to turn up in any shape or form. I think we are pleasantly surprised by a few things. So first of all, before we correlate with the categories of expenditure, we also correlate our Twitter result with the consumer confidence rating. So that is the first number in the first column, the 0.5237, that is the correlation between confidence rating and our Twitter sentiment. So it is a positive correlation. I would say it's medium strength. It's not extremely strong, but I mean, I'm happy that it is positive. I'm happy that it's not too bad. I mean, it's not one. It's not too bad. Yeah, it's not. I mean, it would be better. I don't know what is better, but I'm happy with that number. So what I'm also happy to see is that there are a few very strong numbers in the second column. We also see it in the first column where we use our Twitter sentiment analysis. So what is worth mentioning are things like category 11, the one on supermarkets. So if we the correlation is negative for both of them, it's about the same size. It's quite negative when we use the consumer rating. It's also quite negative when we use a sentiment on Twitter. What is also worth mentioning, so there are some big positive numbers. We also get it when we use Twitter. So for example, category number 8, postal and courier. It is a correlation with confidence rating is 0.8. A correlation with Twitter sentiment is 0.6. So I think this refers to people buying things online. So when you buy things online to be shipped to your house, of course, you'll use a courier service. Some other numbers that's also strong. The last one on travel agency and tours, we got 0.9. Correlation with consumer confidence, we got 0.58, about 0.6 on Twitter, using our Twitter sentiment. So not everything is mirror image. Not everything is a perfect replication. But again, given that we know nothing about Twitter data, we didn't know if anything would work at all. I think both of us are pleasantly surprised when we see these outcomes. David, do you have something?
No,
to add?
I studied economics, but that was many years ago, and I see that there's a relationship here, and I just think that there is opportunity to do further analysis here, is what this tells me. It tells me that there's some of these, they're not overly strong relationships, but there's a relationship that could be strong enough there for further investigation. So, which actually takes us on to our basic observations. Let me just click there. Yeah, we came up with three key observations. So there was a downturn in the sentiment in the Twitter data, and there was a downturn in the economic data that we looked at. And there was a downturn in consumer confidence. So all three things that we looked at, so the Roy Morgan data, the electronic card data, and the Twitter data, all indicated that there was a downturn in performance. And there was a relationship there on a month-by-month basis. There was a relationship there between them. Not so strong in some cases, but there may be some reasons for that, and that's what I'll actually take you to next. So, yes, we've seen a relationship, maybe not so strong as it could have been on some, but there was a relationship. Some of the challenges that we saw, New Zealand is a small country, so it's got 5.5 million people living in it now, Lydia.
Yes, and they don't really use Twitter much.
Yeah, so New Zealand is not the biggest Twitter nation. If I was the owners of Twitter, you'd probably be thinking, well, New Zealand's in there, that's good, but they're not a major player. So it turns out New Zealand has probably only got about 300,000 people using Twitter. Then a little bit more research I did on that found that the people using Twitter, it's actually the main focus, or the biggest cohort is a group of females in the age of, I think it was 18 to 30 age bracket was the biggest cohort. So the people who are tweeting in New Zealand it's not necessarily a perfect representation of the entire country.
That is true for other countries too.
Yes.
If you are serious about the statistics, you will want to look at the user profiles.
Yes, so we'd need to consider that and see if there is a way of either extrapolating that out to a wider group, or focusing in on a particular cohort of Twitter users, or a random sample of Twitter users. So our opportunity there for improvement, if we were to do this study again, or if someone else was to take it on, try and get a much larger, broader social media base. So perhaps bring in tweets or comments from either other social media platforms, or just going for a very large population of Twitter users. The next challenge, as I've said here, the cohort of tweeters is not necessarily reflective of the broader community. We haven't analysed in this who the particular tweeters were. So we've just taken these tweets as their tweets in Twitter. We haven't gone and said, is this a particular user set? So that's something that you may want to consider. The next, our next challenge and takeaway was that we used the WordStat sentiment dictionary as a base dictionary. We just took it straight out of the box and we ran with it. So we haven't done any an updating of that sentiment dictionary to reflect the New Zealand economy, or the way New Zealanders speak. Now, yes, New Zealanders speak English, but New Zealand has got a lot of, actually quite a bit of Maori also thrown in there as well into the way people tweet. So you've got some other languages being thrown in there as well. So that's something that you need to consider, updating your sentiment dictionary to reflect the population that you're actually looking at. Now, there's probably some other words that the way New Zealand uses the words may be different to the way that an American or a Canadian or even an Australian may use the word. I know there's always a lot of jokes between Australians and New Zealanders about how New Zealanders might use a particular word. So you'd need to be considering your appropriate sentiment dictionary.
Yeah, in New Zealand, yeah, nah is a soft no. Is yeah, nah, what does yeah, nah mean to you in Australia? Is it a yes or a no?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. We should check how that turns out in the sentiment analysis. I have no idea, actually.
Something for us to look at with the next one, Lydia. Then the fourth challenge and opportunity that we came up with was that the data that we observed, we analysed only 104,000 tweets. We weren't able to break it down perfectly across the different segments. So if we'd had a much larger data set, if we were able to break it into the same retail categories that we were actually able to look at with the economic data, maybe we would be able to see a stronger relationship between different things there. So again, an opportunity there if you can extract a much larger data set. Now, the smallest version of Stata is able to handle 2.14 billion observations. So if you can get 2.14 billion tweets from Stata, that would be a decent sized data set. I haven't maxed out WordStat yet, so it had no trouble handling 104,000 tweets. Maybe that's a question for Tony. Is there a maximum number of data points that you're able to load into WordStat? But I had no trouble processing 104,000 tweets in WordStat, and I expect that it would be able to handle much bigger as well. So they're our challenges and opportunities. So Lydia, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that part for our next steps? Should we go forward with it?
I mean, we started using New Zealand data because we wanted to submit to a New Zealand journal, nothing else really. And because we never looked, this is our first time looking at New Zealand Twitter data, and we didn't know it was so thin to start with. So I suppose that is our lesson for the rest of the world, right? Pick a country or pick a hashtag that is active.
Yes, yes. So that was our big takeaway as well. There was one hashtag I started to follow called #NZEcon, and I actually found that there was one user who uses that.
Yeah, no, it is because the data, because it is so thin on Twitter. People don't pick up these hashtags, and therefore these hashtags die.
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly what's happened with this NZEcon hashtag. I personally know, I was quite surprised. I actually personally know the guy who uses this hashtag, and Lydia knows him as well.
It's a small world.
Yes.
And it has to do with economics, right? It's a small world, yes.
It is, yeah. So there are our challenges and opportunities. I think, Tony, we'll cut over to questions now.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, just to say that, yes, WordStat can process many hundreds of thousands of tweets, and you know, if more and more, way more than that. So so if you have a question, please put it into the chat, and we'll get going on them, and we'll see how many we can get through here. I have one question first to start off before I get to them. Did you consider, I guess you didn't just because of time, but did you consider modifying the dictionary to create themes along the same themes or buckets that were in the categories from Morgan, like retail, grocery store? Did you think about doing that?
Yeah, so we did. I'd just take you back very quickly to one particular slide where it's that one. It is this one. So yes, we did, but what we found was that there was not enough use of those particular words that would allow us to build a category related to those retail segments.
Okay.
So people actually weren't tweeting supermarket, or I'm going to buy food, or I've just been down to the pub, or I'm going out for dinner. So there wasn't enough tweets in the set of tweets that we looked at to allow us to break those into those different categories.
Okay.
But very good point, Tony. If we'd had a bigger data set, if we'd looked at, if we could have cast the net further to pull in more tweets, maybe we could have looked at categorizing those in different ways. So a couple of things that we were restrained in, only being able to download 30,000 tweets a month was a bit of a constraint. So if you wanted to do this on an industrial scale, you would need to have a look at getting a paid developer account.
Okay. So a sort of a housekeeping one. One person asked, sorry, I missed it, but ANZ Roy Morgan is correlated with ?
Both the electronic card transaction categories and also the share of positive sentiment from our Twitter data analysis.
Okay. Can you only collect data via hashtags, or can you collect all tweets from specific users? And I think you answered that question, but why don't you answer it again? Yeah,
and so within the WordStat Twitter extract feature, you can choose a hashtag. You can choose a particular user by typing @ and then their username, or you can just type in a word and it will pull anything that it finds with that particular word. We chose to use hashtags because we wanted to see what people were, we wanted to limit the tweets that we were getting. It's not able to just say, give me every tweet. You have to define your search in some way.
Right. Well, plus you wouldn't want every tweet. You only wanted tweets that had to do with what you were looking at.
Yeah, and we used hashtags for that. That was the best way to do it.
As opposed to using words. Okay.
Yes.
What about the comments to tweets? So the retweets, or not so much retweets, but the comments to tweets that people would make, did you collect those as well?
Yeah, so when someone does a comment, it actually is considered its own tweet. So if I reply to, Tony, if you go and tweet right now and say, okay, Lydia and David have done an awesome presentation, and I reply in that tweet saying, Tony, thanks for having us on board today, that actually represents two separate tweets. And there are some indicators within the Twitter data set that says this is a retweet or a quote tweet, and we were able to consider that. We had tried looking at Twitter influence as well to see how whether or not the person tweeting was very influential. So we put them into different buckets based on the number of retweets they're having and the number of followers, and we calculated an algorithm for doing that. But we found out that wasn't actually going to be that helpful to our analysis. So we haven't applied the that influence factor in the analysis.
Okay. Do we have any other comments? Do we have any other questions? Oh, here's another one down there. Are you able to collect the follower list? Also, who the Twitter user is following?
You can't get the Twitter following list, but you can get the numbers of followers.
Okay.
But David, that might be a feature of a free academic account.
Oh, that may be a feature of a free academic account. Yeah, then Twitter, as I said, the way that they make.
I don't know if it's a privacy feature. I have no idea.
Yeah. So the way Twitter actually make their money is through selling this data.
Okay. I had another question. This is actually from me. If anybody else has questions, throw them in. We're getting to the top of the clock here, and we'll let you go soon. But for you to start our day, and some of us to go to supper or wherever we're going to go, or maybe lunch wherever you are. Did you use the keyword and context feature very much? And if you did, how did you use it? And did you find it helpful?
We used the keyword in context a little bit in our exploratory analysis up front to see how people were using particular words in relation to their tweets. But that was only in the initial exploratory analysis. So before we decided to just apply the WordStat sentiment dictionary. Okay,
so you didn't. Okay, can you share the Python script that you used to extract tweets?
Yes. So on one of the slides, I've got the link on one of the slides, I believe. But what we can do.
Yeah, oh, right there. I saw it.
Comparing the data.
Next one. Yeah. Next one.
That one?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a link here on this slide out to GitHub where we have the Python script or the Stata Python Twitter API script saved out there. Now, for that to work, you will need to have your Twitter keys. So once you're approved as a developer, you'll need to create a set of Twitter keys. And it's a little bit of a process there on the Twitter side. And I will also add the caveat there, Twitter are always changing their API. So the API I originally was going to use a Twitter extract tool that had been developed by Stata Corp, but it was actually developed by an intern working at Stata Corp. His worked, but by the time I got around to having a developer account, Twitter had changed their API, so we had to develop this new one. This new one we did actually works really well, and it's based on a different Python script, but that one gives you all the data just in a Python data set, and ours is available as a dialog box in Stata. So you just fill the data in. And
Okay, good. Did you have more to say? I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, that's it, that one.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating. This session is being recorded, so you'll be able to, it'll be posted on the website. If you need to get in contact with David or Lydia, their contact information has been on the screens, and you could also go and review the presentation when we post it on the website, which should be in the next day or so. Finally, I would just like to say that our next Lunch and Learn will be Tuesday, September 22nd at 12 to 1 Eastern. You can register on the Provalis Research website on the webinar section. The title is Discovering Latent Political Discourses by Dr. Peter Jacques, who shows how you use theoretical and methodological processes to identify and describe discourses using dictionary-based content analysis. So thank you very much. Do you guys have any final words?
No, thank you very much for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating, and we hope to see you next week. And it's Tuesday, so next Tuesday. So thanks a lot, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.